Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is the Steven Out. We are back with another 007 movie review. Today we'll be reviewing Timothy Dalton's very first 007 outing in 1987's The Living Daylights. Now before we get into the cast and the actual review, let's get into a bit of background. Now, by 1985, Roger Moore, who had done 7 films by this point and was at the time the longest serving Bond, being Bond for roughly 12 years, retired at the age of 58. Now in all consciousness, this was the right move, because the one complaint Roger Moore always got was that he was getting too old for the role anymore, and it was definitely noticeable. Hell, if you look at A View to a Kill, his age was very noticeable. And by this point, the series had to do something that they haven't done in a long time: look for someone new to take on the role of 007. And for a while, the candidate to take over was Pierce Brosnan, who was gaining popularity on the TV show Remington Steele as a 007 spoof, and for many, he was seen as the logical candidate to take over, and to be all fairness, he was next in line. However, what ended up happening was, well, you see, the show Remington Steele was kind of cancelled, but however, at the last minute, it was revived. At the last minute, and due to contract disputes, sadly, Pierce Brosnan could not play 007. You see, playing 007 for many people is a big deal. It's more important than who's going to be the next president, or who's going to be the next pope, or even who's going to be the new king or queen of England. For many people, it's the most important thing there is, and everyone has a contribution to play on who they would like in the role of 007. So, with that said, with Pierce Brosnan out, the producers went with a well-known, talented actor in acting community, but not really hugely known by the mainstream, a Welshman by the name of Timothy Dalton. Now, Timothy Dalton has always been on a possible list of candidates to take over the role of 007. He was even considered for the role back in 1969 on Her Majesty's, and even did a screen test, from what I've been told, but he declined the role, feeling he was too young for the part, and I give him huge credit for that. Out of all the actors, he came the most prepared for playing Bond. So far, this was the fact that he went and read all the original Ian Fleming novels to get himself in the mindset and bring Bond back to his foundations. He wanted to bring Bond back to his roots. After all, the Roger Moore era was pretty much over-the-top, campy, and full of gags. He wanted his Bond to bring Bond back down to the Cold War espionage that essentially the series began with, or at least was in mind at the time, and certainly with the novel. However, there is a problem. You see, Timothy Dalton was so little known, he already had a lot of people against him, because he was known for stage acting and has done lots of movie parts, but he never really got full recognition. And for many people, there's a lot of weight on his shoulders, as he had to, live up to the Bond name. And what Timothy Dalton did, he wanted to have his own take. Instead of copying what Sean Connery or what Roger Moore did, he wanted to essentially bring his take to be a much more darker and realistic. With John Glenn back in the director's chair for his, I believe, if I recall, his 4th time directing, and Cubby Broccoli essentially still holding the reins on the film, and they adapted the title of the film, The Living Daylights, from another Ian Fleming short story. The aim was to bring Bond back to his darker roots. So the question remains, how did this film go, and how do I personally feel about it? Well, before we do that, let's get into the cast. Like I said before, Timothy Dalton was the new Bond here, and I like how he looks the part. We're finally going back to the more younger looking Bond, and this is a guy who, in my opinion, I believed could actually pull off all these fights and stunts, something that I'm sure many other people couldn't believe what Roger Moore could do. We also have Marana Dabo as Kara Milova, essentially the main Bond girl, and arguably this is the only film where there is really truly one main Bond girl. We also have Jeroen Karib as General Pushkin. General Pushkin right here, portrayed by John Roche Davis. And then here we got General Georgy Khrushchev, portrayed by Gino Krabi. Essentially, these two are Russian generals. We also here have the character of Brad Whitaker, portrayed by Joe Don Baker, who would actually go to appear in another Bond film during the early years of the Pierce Brosnan Bond films. But we'll get to that when we hit the Roger Moore, the Pierce Brosnan films. We also here have Karam Shah. Hopefully these names are being pronounced right. Portrayed by Art Malika, and essentially is an Afghan Mujahideen leader. Rounding out the rest, we have M, portrayed by Robert Brown. We have Frederick Gray, portrayed by Jeffrey Keane, and this would be the last time we'd see this character. We would also have Desmond Llewellyn in the role of Q, and we have a brand new Moneypenny this time around, portrayed by Caroline Bliss, and only did the role for 2 films. We also have Felix Leiter back, this time portrayed by John Terry. We also here have the main henchman, Thomas Whitley, as Andrus Whisker as Necros, and it's essentially a Russian tall blonde henchman. Jeez, haven't we haven't that before? And we have an MI6 contact by the name of Saunders, portrayed by Thomas Whitley. Also here we have, also in this film, the last time we would see General Gogol. Now, he was actually meant to be in the film and be in the role of Pushkin. However, due to his ill health, he couldn't really do that for much of the film, so he gets a cameo. But with understanding that, it would have been nice. But for many things, this film was the last time we would see, for honestly, 2 regulars of the Roger Moore era, this would be the last time we'd see them. And yeah, so let's get into the film. Our movie begins with the traditional Bond gun barrel. We then cut to a scene where, essentially, all the double O's are on a training exercise by M to essentially infiltrate a place. They then skydive out of a plane and land on the island where they plan to go and does the infiltration. However, one gets shot. Or does he? Yep, this is a training exercise and they're using paintball guns. He is essentially killed. However, there's also another guy who's not playing by the rules. He ends up killing one of the people essentially supposed to be in the training exercise, and then he kills a fellow 00 agent, but he leaves him a message which will play a huge role in the film. This other 00 agent is then pretty much falls off the face of a cliff and dies. And here we get to see Timothy Dalton's Bond for the very first time. And I love how it's a build-up to this, and I really love it. This then would end with essentially a car chase as the imposter who has killed that 00 agent tries to run away, and Bond tries to catch up with him. I love the stunt of how it's really realistic, how he's on top of this military jeep trying to get to the driver. You could really picture Timothy Dalton really doing this version of Bond doing this. And for what I've been told, Timothy Dalton did a lot of his own stunts. Already, this feels like a fresh take. And the fight is also very brutal. The jeep's on fire, and it's just going all over the place. Eventually, the jeep crashes through a wall and essentially about to crash into the water. Bond managed to get out the last minute with a parachute, and the jeep explodes, killing the guy. Bond, of course, happens to land on a yacht with a beautiful hot woman there who's saying it's so boring here, and finds a real man. Well, your prayers have been answered, lady. He then jumps on the boat, takes her phone, tells the woman he's talking to, call you back, and starts typing in the number. When she asks who he is, he says the legendary line, Bond, James Bond. I just like how it's a build-up. We get to see more of this action, and the way he says it, it's not like with much fanfare, but for me, I really dig it. It's just casual, but also like he's out of breath. Just as he's calling up exercise control saying he'll report in an hour, the woman passes him some champagne and asks, won't you join me? And of course, in typical Bond fashion, better make that 2. I already love that moment. And here we kick off the film with the usual opening titles. And it has a bit of an 80s feel, but overall, I really enjoy this film quite a lot. And immensely. For me, it's a really good start to the film, and this song is another one I happen to really like. The music here was the song "The Living Daylights" was co-written with Paul Wachter and was performed by the pop music group Aha. I believe I am being correct on that. However, I did hear there was some behind-the-scenes problem resulting in 2 different versions with John Barry. But overall, I really like this. It's a fresh feel, and it's so invigorating. Already, this film is immensely promising. Bond is essentially being brought back more to his roots than it ever was in the Roger Moore era. We then kick off with that. We're seeing Bond at a concert recital where he meets with the contact Saunders. And to be honest, Saunders is your classic run-of-the-mill agent who's read the books, but has never really been in the field, and honestly doesn't really know much. He has been assigned, along with Saunders, to help get out a defected KGB officer, General Kozhov, to quickly get him out and, get him out of the concert hall and get him to the West. Well, again, we're bringing back more into the realm of essentially the Cold War, something that, again, we've had in the Roger Moore era, but I think not to the extent as it was in this film. Just as that's happening, Bond has to protect him from a KGB sniper, who he happens to know is an attractive blonde female cellist from the orchestra that he noticed during the film. However, he feels that something is not right, and so instead of kills her, he wounds her. And this gives him a bit of slack from Saunders because his orders were to kill her, but he says, no, she's not a sniper. She didn't know the right end from the other. Already, I could see this Bond is more of a professionalism. I believe he can handle a sniper. He looks like a professional. And I like how he manages to get the general out of the situation, out and get away. And it's a really fun scene. The whole thing's great. And I like how he just tips one on Saunders. However, despite that, the mission is a success. Despite that, we then cut to essentially Bond going through the to find out who this celloist is with the help of Q. We get to see a little bit, at least one little gag in the office with some new gadgets that Q was trying out. And we also get to see Moneypenny. And honestly, she's a bit average. She's a secretary, has a crush on Bond, but I feel that the character's a little bit kind of not really done well. And this is nothing against the actress in question, but I feel there's just something wrong here. With also something new to the series as we cut to a new scene where Bond is going to M's place, essentially. A compound, and we haven't really seen that since On Her Majesty's, which is very new. And also something new, for the first time ever since the late 60s, Bond is once again driving an Aston Martin, something that is very different. This really shows you how much the filmmakers really wanted to bring Bond back to the roots, back to the Cold War. And during this scene, we also find that there is a henchman, Necros, who is essentially going around killing people by using essentially earphones, which seems to be always playing the exact same song over and over and over again, and it's very realistic. But other than that, I can't really say this henchman really stands out. He's just another tall Russian henchman with no real personality. Granted, he talks, he's not a silent type, but he's just average. Anyway, we get back and it turns out that there's a debriefing that Kozhov informs MI6 that the KGB has reenacted an old policy, Smith's Beyond them, meaning death to spies, the same words that were written on the note that killed the 00 early in the film, and has been revived by General Pushkin, the new head of the KGB who was taken over when Gogol had retired. And essentially, with this in mind, this has everyone worried, and everyone's now concerned of what this is going to do. But again, M and Bond, and then Sir Frederick Grey then leave the compound to discuss furthermore, but Kushkov is ordered to essentially stay at the compound. Whilst that's happening, Necros causes an elaborate escape by using exploding milks. No, I'm not being stupid. He uses exploding milks and all of that, ends up killing a few members. We even get to see the parrot from For Your Eyes Only make a cameo, and essentially ends up kidnapping Koshkov. And this has led the M to believe that this is the result of Pushkin, and has essentially ordered Bond to track down Pushkin and eliminate him. However, Bond is not sure. He knows Pushkin could have the resources to do this, but he's not psychotic. And M even says the fact that he's dealt with him on several occasions, and it's clear that we've already introduced to a new character whom both the MI6 community have a huge respect and love for. Even though he's on the opposite side, there's a sense of like almost a man that they admire, though at the same time have to resent. I really like that's what they've done with this character. But despite that, he is still ordered, despite his reservations, he agrees to go out and do the job, especially when he learns that the 004, who was the agent killed in the beginning of the film, has that name tag that said it, and that said the Messerschmitt be on him. Realizing that, Bond realizes what he has to do, but he does a bit more detective work. So Bond returns to Bratislava. Hopefully that name's being pronounced right, and I'm not trying to be racist, I just find it hard to pronounce certain words. Anyway, so he goes to track down the concelloist, Kira Malova, the guy that, the woman with the rifle. He finds out a few things. One, the rifle that attempted to kill him early in the film was filled with blanks, and that she is also Khrushchev's girlfriend. Bond is then convinced that something is really not on the up and up, but he tries to pass himself off as Khrushchev's friend to Kira, and persuades her to accompany him to Vienna, supposedly to reunite with him. They then end up escaping a bunch of KGB agents, whilst essentially trying to cross the border. And there's a lot of fun action scenes that I really like, all staying true into the world of realism. We get to see the Aston Martin use all its gadgets and all its glory. We also get to see another huge scene before this event took place, where we get to see Bond equipped with his latest gadgets, such as a keychain that is filled with all sorts of unique gadgetry, which I'm really loving to see. They ended up crossing the border into Austria, whilst using the cello as an escape. Now, if you're wondering what I mean, well, let me explain. Like I said, there was a chase scene in the Aston Martin where Bond got to use his gadgets. And during that, it's really fun. But then when the car exploded, he then used the concello case as sort of a ski to go down the side of the mountain. It's hard to get your eyes around, but it actually works. And it's honestly still in the world of realism. And I like the scene, and it's really great. However, if I could point out one thing that I find hard to believe, is one thing that Timothy Dalton has always gotten flack for. The quips. Honestly, I don't think Timothy Dalton really needed to have done the quips. His idea was to bring Bond closer back into the reality of harder edge Bond. And honestly, the quips I felt just didn't really work with him. Anyway, with that, we then cut to a new scene with Pushkin visiting an arms dealer by the name of Brad Whitaker, who is essentially a military fanatic, and he is obsessed with the military. And he's also an arms dealer. However, Pushkin tells him that the deal is cancelled and the money needs to be returned. But we then find out that Brad Whitaker is in league with Khrushchev, and is essentially that they are teaming up for a big plot. And it turns out that he was to set up the whole Pushkin as a traitor. So already, this film is given so many twists and turns, and we are really, if you look at it, we're getting more and more back into the world of realism. We then get to see, for me, the fun bit after this scene is Bond and Kira essentially going all throughout like Vienna, and here a true romance really blossoms. Now, for me, I really like Kira as she's this really innocent girl, but she's proven that she can handle herself, and we essentially will see that in the climax of the film. She's a bit naive, I will admit, and sometimes annoying to a degree, but she's not a terrible Bond girl. For me, she's a Bond girl that exists in the middle, if that's a thing, of being both bad and good. I love this scene, the way that they interact, and of course when they get to see like an opera or a big performance, and we get to see Saunders again. Bond reveals to him everything, that she's Khrushchev's girlfriend, and the whole thing might have been a setup. Even though Saunders is skepticism, he does believe Bond does investigating work. So for me, I kind of like how this changed in his character. He could have been just a plain ass dick, pardon the word, but he proves that he is an agent, and when he's presented some evidence that turns out to be true, he will do it. And I think this is really good for his character, is again, he's not a field agent, but thanks to Bond maybe's help, he's starting to become a more confident field agent. I would have loved to see more of him in the series. It's a weird way of saying that, but I would have loved it. However, because of Kushkov and Brad Whitaker, they ordered essentially another spy to be killed to make sure Bond kills Pushkin. So what ends up happening is Saunders ends up getting killed in a very brutal way at the hands of Necros, and we get to see Bond go full dark. And this was when we were seeing a scene where Bond was with Kira, essentially going through an amusement park and having fun. We get to see this lighthearted side, but Bond is a professionalism, and he turns into this cold-blooded killer, almost willing to kill. But we do see that he is still, but we see that he's fully gone dark, and it may look like that Brad Whitaker may have won and fully convinced Bond to actually go and kill Pushkin, even when Saunders presented some evidence that may contradict that could fully, imply what Bond's believing. So what ends up happening is we get this really great scene with Bond tracking down Pushkin, and this really great interrogation scene in essentially this nice hotel room with Pushkin, and I'm assuming is his wife. Although I don't think that he is unfaithful. I'm assuming that this is a genuine, real relationship and not some side woman he has on the side, which is something I always felt was always different compared to Gogol. I always felt that Gogol was a bit of a womanizer, but here I feel that Pushkin is a genuine ladies' man. And I like just the scene. Both actors pull it off, and mostly it's to Timothy Dalton, who I fully believe is this cold-hearted assassin. I feel that no one else could have pulled this off. But despite what you may think, he doesn't kill him, as he is fully convinced of Pushkin's innocence. And it's also revealed that actually Khrushchev has been embezzling some money, and he was actually planning on having him arrested. However, despite that, they do realize one thing. As long as Pushkin's alive, they're never going to find out what he's up to, as there's clearly something bigger going on. And I like how the two agree to join forces. They end up faking Pushkin's death in order to essentially have Whitaker and Khrushchev go on with their plan. However, we do get a scene where Khrushchev gets a phone call from someone, and he's very concerned on who it was. However, during this scene where Bond does assassinate Pushkin, there's this great chase, and for what I heard, there was a supposed deleted scene where he was meant to go sliding down these lines on top of a rug, and it would have been like, like a flying carpet little gag, but they decided not to do it. It was too much of a Roger Moore thing. Again, some bits of the Roger Moore were still in the filmmaker's ideology on a Bond film, but of course they didn't do it. There's a deleted scene. I personally love it, and I wouldn't have minded actually being in, but I understand why. They wanted Bond to be more back to basics, and with that said, I absolutely adore what they've done. While Bond's on the escape, he gets apprehended by two women, and it turns out they are CIA agents, and they get to meet the CIA, essentially their main contact, Felix Leiter, who has returned to the series, and we haven't seen him since 1973's Live and Let Die, this time portrayed by a different actor. Now, I've got to be honest, this character is just wasted in this scene. It's just a waste to have him at this moment. And it honestly just does a bit of, dialogue. We then find out, after that, that they're both after Whitaker, but Bond does tell the Pushkin is not dead, this was just a setup job. We then see Bond go back to a hotel room where he meets Kira, and he attempts to reveal everything to her. But however, he is drugged by a martini, and Kira also is convinced of everything that's happened. We then see that Bond is then taken by Krush and Necros into an aircraft. And they find out that what they're taking is this heart, but the ice that's around is actually diamond. So what's going on? More mysteries are being done. And it turns out But that even though what Bond, had made Pushkin has made him as pretty much an enemy of the Russian state. However, it should be proven. However, I do like how he doesn't fully know everything yet. We then find that they land, especially in Afghanistan, where Bond is essentially taken. Afghanistan, Bond is arrested and taken prisoner, along with Kira, who is portrayed by Kushkov. The pair are then sent into this prison, sort of holding cell type prison, where these guards essentially try, abuse them, along with this other prisoner that's in there. And what ends up happening is Bond essentially, thanks to the help of his keychain, which essentially sprays this kind of knockout gas, helps him and Kira escape, and they also free this other prisoner. And once they try to escape, they find out that this other prisoner is Karam Shah, the leader of the local Mujahideen, essentially a resistance group, kind of. Thanks to him freeing him, he has Bond and her come with him to essentially a sort of village or a hideout. And we have this really awkward scene where he's laughing and he's telling him about everything, but he's not fully on board, and we get to see more of the romance between Bond and Kira really blossom here. For me, I feel that Timothy Dalton and Kira's actor, for me, have the really great chemistry, and it's really fantastic to see. We then see that these guys, the Mujahideen, secretly leave for a meeting, and Bond and her secretly go along with it, under the skies, of course, because they don't know. We then find out what the whole plan was. Essentially, the Mujahideen are essentially selling, essentially what the plan was. The Soviets fund to buy massive shipments of opium from the Mujahideen, intent on keeping the profits with enough left over to supply the Soviets with their arms and buy Western arms for Whitaker. So essentially, it's a military deal. And the Mujahideen gets a bit of funds out of it as well. However, Bond doesn't like this, and in a way, Sharim doesn't as well. So what ends up happening, Bond, with the Mujahideen's help, essentially smuggles himself back to the airbase and essentially plants a bomb within the opium and plans to have it be destroyed up in the air. But things go awry when Kushkov and Nekros spot him, and it results in a gun battle between him and essentially these Russians. But he gets some help when the Mujahideens arrive, but not before, when Kira actually leaves first, intending to help Bond when she's mad that these guys won't help. But sure, I think it's developed a soft spot for her, so all of them come in, and there's this huge gun battle. It's really fun. There's a bit of tacky humor, but it's all in good taste and also still in the realm of realism. It's a really fun gun battle, and I like how it has a bit of realism with these guys attacking. And essentially what ends up happening is Bond, Kira, and the Mujahideen end up victorious, as what ends up happening, Bond ends up flying the plane to get it out, and Kira's also on board too. I like how Kira gets in on the action. She's a bit naive, but she can really handle herself. And what ends up happening is Nekros is also on the plane, and they get into a fight with Bond. And it's a really nice scene, how they're really dangling out of a plane, holding onto it, and it's a nice fight scene. I really miss this with most action films. They do CGI with everything, but back in the day, practical effects is the way to go. And honestly, I wish more modern films could go back to that. Anyway, what ends up happening is Nekros literally is literally given a boot. You gotta understand when you see the scene, and essentially falls to his death. It's a pretty brutal scene, but I kind of saw this coming, but I like how it's brutal and still has a fun element to it. Bond also ends up helping the Mujahideen by throwing down a bomb, essentially destroying a bridge that ends up, saving the Mujahideen in the end. Bond ends up grounding the plane. Well, actually not really grounding, but he and Kira quickly get into a jeep, and it sort of has like an ejector thing, and they manage to get away safely, with the plane exploding, destroying all of the opium. But however, not everything's done yet. As it turns out, during the fight, Kushkov survived, and would no doubt have returned to Brad Whitaker. With the help of Felix Leiter, Bond infiltrates the facility and has a standoff with Brad Whitaker, where Bond is victorious. I've talked about this death scene in my top 10 villain deaths. I think I would call it one of the worst ones in the series because I just didn't enjoy it as much and it felt too anticlimactic. However, also for the first time in the series, the really main villain, Kushkov, is actually not dead. You see, what ends up happening, Bond gets saved at the last minute by Pushkin and some of his men, who end up arresting Kuskov and several men, and is ordered to bring them back to Moscow in a diplomatic bag. I liked how Kuskov is apprehended at the end of the film. We then end the film with Kira as the solo concelloist in this big performance, where we get to see a cameo by John Barry. It's a really nice thing, and I like it. It's fun with it. However, when the performance ends, we get to see, like I said, General Gobel in his final scene, and we get to also see how Sharam and a bunch of his Mujahideen ends up crashing the place. It's all in fun. It's all in fun. It's all in fun how they come in. There's a bit of a joke about like how they said they couldn't get they had trouble getting through customs, and Emma says, "Geez, I wonder why." It might be a little bit dated now, but I can enjoy it. But then I asked where Bond is, but he said he's on another mission. Kira then goes to a dressing room where it turns out Bond's there, and they have a little nice fun moment. It's really great. I love how they end the film. For me, The Living Daylights came at just the right time, and for me, it was a perfect time to really rejuvenate interest in the Bond series. The Roger Moore era was really tacky and juvenile, and essentially The Living Daylights return was essentially, I believe if I recall correctly, was on the series, I believe, 25th birthday, which is a huge milestone for the series to be around for that long. And for me, I felt that this film really brought a lot of interest back into Bond, bringing back a lot of the Cold War elements with a lot of serious and more believable action, and a story that has a lot of interesting twists and turns. And the majority of the credit has to go to Timothy Dalton for bringing Bond back into this more serious and realistic world. He really pulls it off with a serious tone. I really didn't like the quips, I will be honest. I felt that they should have just left it. But honestly, I felt Timothy Dalton bringing Bond back into the world of realism was the perfect way to go after the Roger Moore era. And like he once said in a documentary, he didn't want to copy Roger Moore. He wanted to do his own thing. Kira is a very fun and interesting Bond girl. I don't think she's in my top 10 last time I recall, but she's certainly fun, enjoyable. However, despite that, I still have some complaints with this film. For one, I felt Felix Leiter was kind of wasted in the last moment. It just fully came out of nowhere for me. But also, he does very little, despite the fact this is the character's big return. I also gotta think, it's also, the plot was basically, even though it had twists and turns, it was basically just to, villains to basically get to get rich. And honestly, Brad Whitaker and Kuskov, I think, are some of the most uninteresting villains in the series. I honestly felt Brad Whitaker could have been a really great villain, because first off, a guy obsessed with the military for me is a character I would be instantly drawn to, but he should have had more of a presence on screen and should have been the type of person you really believe was really pulling all the strings, which I think would have been really great. But Kuskov is often said as to be the main villain of the film, and basically he's the slime ball. I never really found it to be too threatening, all that, and basically he is just a slimeable character, and even when he's arrested, he still tries to find a way to get out of it. But of course, I do like how he gets his comeuppance. However, he clearly should have died in the airfield, which honestly would have been a far better way for that character to go out on. Well, a far better way, but I can't deny it was what it is. Honestly, this film is really great, and it really was a good way to bring Bond back to his roots. And it was, for me, it's a really fun film. Not in my top 10, but it's certainly a film that any Bond fan should really have a hardcore check out on, especially if you're a huge fan of the Daniel Craig films. For me, Timothy Dalton's first ever outing is a film you really must take a look at. And there we have it. That was The Living Daylights, Timothy Dalton's first time in the role of 007. And it's a film, for me, I think everyone should at least check out. It's worth the watch. After this film, it was a huge hit at the box office and did well quite critically. However, there was some criticisms to Timothy Dalton, feeling that he was too serious. And, too serious, and it was almost too dark. Ironically, these are the claims that is what Daniel Craig's getting, but it's for praise, not criticism. Overall, this film was also considered too dark. Whoa. wait until the next film, they will be definitely shocked. Anyway, despite that, it seemed that this was a good direction for the series to go on. So for their next film, they wanted to continue down that dark path with 1989's License to Kill. So tune in next time when we check out that Bond installment. Until then, this has been the Steven Hour, and ladies and gentlemen, so long for now.